To understand the Korea of today, you have to understand its past and the enormous impact of a single decision. As World War II was winding down, the Soviet Union sent troops into the northern part of Korea, preparing to invade Japan. The advance sparked American fears that the Soviets would try to occupy the entire Korean peninsula after the war.
An executive decision was made in Washington, D.C. Two junior officers were given the instructions to find a map of Korea and find an appropriate dividing line that could separate the Soviet and the U.S. occupation zones. No map of the Korean peninsula was readily available, so they found a National Geographic magazine that had a map of the Korean peninsula in it, and they found roughly the halfway point, which was the 38th parallel, the halfway point between the two.
The Soviets agreed to this boundary. But in the years following the war, the United States and the Soviet Union could not agree on how their occupation should end, or how a unified Korean government should form. Eventually, the United States brought the issue up at the United Nations, which called for free elections to be held on the entire Korean peninsula. The Soviet Union resisted, stopping the United Nations from administering elections in the north. Nevertheless, in May 1948, the United Nations supervised elections in the south. Within months, the Republic of Korea was established, with US-backed Syngman Rhee as its leader. Soon after, the Soviets administered separate single-candidate elections in the north, establishing the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, with Communist Kim Il-sung as its leader.
Now, both sides wanted to unify the Korean peninsula under their respective governments. So in 1949, Kim Il-sung began to lobby Mao Zedong and Joseph Stalin to help him launch an offensive against the South.
North Korea was stronger militarily, and Kim thought he could unify the peninsula by force. Stalin was hesitant, though, because he feared sparking a war with the United States and its allies. Mao was more supportive. He was wary of the Americans, as they had aided his anti-communist rivals during the Chinese Civil War, and Mao saw Korea as a buffer between his country and US-occupied Japan. Meanwhile, back in the United States, Secretary of State Dean Acheson gave a press conference in early 1950 about the US defensive perimeter in the Pacific. He included Japan and the Philippines, but excluded Korea.
And some historians believe that this was also a mistake because that's what led the Chinese and the Soviets and the North Koreans to believe that they could take the peninsula.
On June 25, 1950, North Korean troops flooded into the south, quickly overcoming its defenses. News of the attack quickly reached New York, where the Soviet Union was boycotting the UN Security Council due to a disagreement about which government should control China's seat. With no communist countries present, the Council was able to condemn the North Korean invasion as a breach of the peace, and then it called on all member states to assist the South. President Truman did just that, ordering the US military to intervene in Korea under the UN's mandate. He feared that a communist-controlled Korea might threaten Japan. The northern troops advanced much faster than expected, pushing South Korean forces to the very tip of the peninsula, the Pusan perimeter. But in September, the UN struck back, landing at Inchon on the western coast of South Korea. They cut off North Korean supply lines, recaptured Seoul, and pushed the communist forces back up to the 38th parallel. Here, a major decision had to be made. Should UN forces cross the 38th parallel? The Security Council's resolution that first called for intervention didn't directly address this question. It called for the removal of North Korean forces from South Korea, and by this point, that had been achieved. But it also called on UN members to restore international peace and security in the area. Some officials in the Truman administration argued that peace and security could only be achieved if Korea was unified under a single government. Other U.S. officials, like George Kennan, insisted that advancing past the 38th parallel could draw China or the Soviet Union into battle. But those in favor of crossing the 38th parallel disagreed, citing that U.S. military intelligence suggested China and the Soviet Union would not intervene. Leaders in 1950 faced a pivotal decision. If they crossed the 38th parallel, they had the potential to unify the Korean peninsula. but they could also spark a war with China or the Soviet Union, or even start World War III.